So what if you could build a really powerful, multi-talented AI with just one surprisingly simple goal? Well, today we're digging into the research paper that did exactly that. This is the origin story of GPT-2, and believe me, it completely changed how we think about artificial intelligence.
To really get why this paper was such a game changer, we have to look at the problem it was trying to solve. You see, back then, AI systems were incredible at one thing. You could train a model to be a world-class translator, but it couldn't answer a simple question. The researchers put it perfectly. They were narrow experts, not competent generalists. They were brittle, and this was the big challenge holding the entire field back.
Think of it this way. Imagine a chef who has spent their entire life perfecting a single recipe for chocolate cake. And it's the best cake in the world. But if you ask them to whip up a quick salad, they're just completely lost. That's your narrow expert. A competent generalist, on the other hand, is kind of like a seasoned home cook. They can look at whatever ingredients they have and figure out how to make all sorts of different dishes, adapting on the fly. The goal was to build that adaptable, flexible kind of AI. So how do you get from that one-trick pony to a multi-talented system? Well, the researchers proposed a pretty radical idea. Maybe we don't need to teach the AI every single skill one by one. Maybe it could learn them all on its own.
And this brings us to the absolute core concept of the paper, zero-shot learning. It's the ability to perform a task you've never, ever seen before. Kind of like teaching a child the alphabet and how to form words, and then one day they just start writing poetry with no specific lessons on poetry at all. That's the idea, that these complex skills could just emerge from a very simple foundation.
And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, it sounds almost like magic. How can a model just start doing things like translation or summarization if its only training was just to predict the next word in a sentence? How does that work? Well, the paper's big insight is that we don't need to invent new tasks for the AI. The skills we wanted to learn, like reading comprehension, are already demonstrated naturally inside of language itself. I mean, look at this example. A reading comprehension task is really just a sequence of text, right? First you get some instructions, then a document, then a question, and finally an answer. So if a model sees enough examples just like this out in the wild, it can start to learn the pattern of that task, without ever being told, hey, you are now doing reading comprehension.
Okay, so the theory makes a lot of sense, but how do you actually build it? Well, it turns out the recipe was surprisingly straightforward, but it required pushing the boundaries on three key ingredients.
First, you need a massive, and I mean massive and incredibly diverse dataset. Second, you need a really powerful model architecture. In this case, it was the transformer, which is especially good at understanding context in language. And third, and this is crucial, you need scale. A lot of it. We're talking more data and a bigger model than people had seriously tried before for this kind of thing.
Let's just talk about that data for a second. The researchers created a whole new data set called WebText. Now, instead of just scraping the entire internet, which is full of, junk, they did something really clever. They took all the links shared on Reddit that had at least 3 upvotes. The thinking was that this would act as a kind of human filter for interesting, high-quality stuff. And the result? 40 gigabytes of cleaned-up, curated text.
And then there's the scale. The largest model they built, GPT-2, had 1.5 billion parameters. Now, you can think of parameters as all the little knobs and dials inside the model's brain that it can tweak to learn patterns. At the time, 1.5 billion was an absolutely massive leap. It gave the model this enormous capacity to just absorb all the complexity of that 40 gigabytes of text. Okay, so they mixed all the ingredients together. Massive data, a big model, and a very simple learning goal. The question is, did the magic happen? Did these generalist abilities actually show up? Well, the results were frankly staggering. And the payoff is just so clear in these results. Each one of these charts shows the exact same undeniable trend. As the model size gets bigger along the bottom, its zero-shot performance just gets better and better across all these different tasks. For reading comprehension, for translation, you name it, bigger was truly better. Skill wasn't just a nice-to-have, it was the secret ingredient. Now, these charts are super compelling, but let's make it a bit more concrete. What does this performance actually look like? Can the model use all this knowledge it's picked up to do something we can all relate to? Like, answer some trivia questions. It turns out, yeah, it could. The model could answer questions like, who is the founder of psychoanalysis with Sigmund Freud? It could even identify Chernobyl just from its description. Now remember, this model was never, ever given a trivia dataset. It absorbed all this knowledge just by reading massive amounts of text from the internet. It was learning facts about the real world as a side effect of learning language.
So this all seems pretty incredible, right? But these results also brought up a really critical, skeptical question that absolutely had to be answered before anyone could really declare victory. Is this genuine learning? Or is it just a very sophisticated form of plagiarism? I mean, with 40 gigabytes of text to draw from, maybe the model just memorized huge chunks of the internet and is just spitting back answers it's seen before. It's the difference between actually understanding a concept and just memorizing the textbook definition, right?
The researchers found their answer by tracking a metric called perplexity, which is just a measure of how surprised a model is by new text. A lower score is better. It means the model is getting great at predicting what comes next. And as you can see in this chart, the model's score on text it had already seen, the training data, and brand new text was nearly identical. This right here is the smoking gun. It wasn't just memorizing, it was truly learning the underlying patterns of language.
But let's be clear. The researchers were also very realistic about the limitations. While GPT-2 was a massive breakthrough in proving the concept, its performance on some tasks, like summarization, was still pretty basic. It was a huge step forward as a piece of research for sure, but it wasn't a product ready for the real world without a lot more work.
And that really brings us to the ultimate takeaway from all this. This quote just perfectly sums up the paper's legacy. This simple, elegant idea that if you take a big enough model, train it on enough diverse text with the simple predict the next word goal, something amazing happens. It starts to learn how to do things you never explicitly taught it. This one insight paved the way for the entire revolution in generative AI that we are all living through today. It proved that the path to a more general AI might not be about meticulously teaching a machine every single skill, but maybe just about letting it read, learn, and scale.